Well, welcome to our first lecture for EDD 918. And in this lecture, I'm going to be covering just an introduction to organization. So this course is about organizational systems and behavior. Well, what is an organization and why is it important that we study this topic? So that's a little bit of what I'm going to be covering here in this first module in our first two lectures that I have for you. And I think organizations are one of those things. If I said, what is it? We all know what an organization is. We can point to them. We're all part of them. And I'll get more into that in a minute. But how do we define them? How are they created? And what role do they play in our lives and things like that? So that's what we'll be getting into. It's interesting, just a little bit of background on me. I didn't realize how interested I was in organizational life, organizational systems, organizational behavior until I got into my doctoral work. And what happened was, at the same time, I was working in a national corporation. They had an office here in Lincoln, Nebraska, where I'm located, and I was in their leadership development area. And so I kind of got a really under the hood view, so to speak, of the inner workings and everything that goes on in an organization, the politics, things like that. Not to mention, at the time, our organization was going through a pretty significant change and transition as I came in and I was working, and there were all kinds of ripple effects over the 7 years that I worked there while in doc school. So it gave me a real front row seat for organizational life. And I found out I had a real interest in this. And then in the meantime, I'm studying it in my courses. And so to me, that's just such a sweet spot for all of us when what we're studying can match up with what we're living in real life right now, right? And I hope that can be the case for you as you go through this course, that as we talk about these things, you can take that. If you watch this on Monday evening, on Tuesday morning, you're at work and you can say, oh yeah, I can see how some of these things are playing out or identify characteristics or what have you. So I'm hoping it's very practical for you. Now, the first thing that I wanted to say as we talk about introduction to organizations, by the way, hopefully you have the slides in front of you and you can follow along there. As I'm looking at that first slide after the title slide of why. Why are we studying this? And I mean, I already kind of mentioned some of it, but because you're looking saying, well, I thought this was a doctorate in leadership. Right. Well, I think it's safe to say, and we probably all already know this, but why study organizational systems and organizational behavior, organizational life? Because the vast majority of our leadership occurs within organizations. I could make the argument, depending on how broadly or things like that we define organization, one could make the argument that all of our leadership occurs within an organization. And again, we'll talk more about what an organization is here a little bit later. But that's why it's important, and that's why we have this course in a doctoral program focused on leadership. Because if you are going to be an effective leader, whether that is in a higher education environment, a hospital system, a healthcare administrative kind of role, a nonprofit, public health, anything like that, no matter what kind of leadership or what kind of organization you're a part of and the leadership role that you're exercising, you need to understand how organizations work. How do we get the work accomplished, and how do we work with the individuals within our systems to accomplish our goals? And I don't mean that in a selfish Machiavellian way. I mean our goals, our shared goals, the goals of the organization. How do we get that done? And so that's why this course, I do believe, is so important in this doctoral program. So now let's get into what is an organization. Like I said a little bit ago, I think, if I said, do you know what an organization is? Most of us would say, sure, I do. It's that building over there. That is an organization. And to which I might, depending on how curmudgeonly I feel that day, if I want to really argue with you and be a little bit cynical with you, my youngest daughter gives me a hard time, and she's like, "Oh, you always have to argue with me and prove you're right." Just some days you get like that. I might say, "Well, that building's not an organization, right?" And again, we'll get into that. Organizations are the people. And I think we probably all understand that. But those buildings are a physical representation of an organization. But what is it? What is an organization? Well, here's a couple of definitions for you. The root of organization is the Greek word organon, which means implement or a tool for making or doing. And I mean, you think about that. What's another word, especially those of you in the medical field, that comes from that Greek word, that Greek root? It's organ, right? And you think about it, our organs are tools for making or doing, and the processes we need to stay alive and all of that. Well, then we have this word organization. So really, what we want to do is we want to think of it this way: organizations are tools or implements that we as humans use to accomplish our purposes. And typically, our goals, our purposes are better accomplished when we work alongside others. So back to the first part of that definition, though, an organization is simply a tool or an implement. Now, I want to be very careful that I clarify here. I am not suggesting that we treat the people in the organization as tools or implements. And we're going to talk about the old classical management view and mechanistic view and how people were often treated like cogs in the machine. I'm not suggesting that in any way. But the organization itself, it is our tool for accomplishing our purposes. And we're going to talk here in I don't know if I get into it in this lecture. We'll see how my time's going. Maybe the next lecture. But we're going to talk about the different kinds of organizations. But you think about, for instance, a nonprofit organization. Nonprofit organizations, one of the things that often makes them stand out, be a little bit distinct, is that they are mission driven. So there's a reason why we form this nonprofit. The person who created, or the people who created it, they have a real passion to stop the spread of this disease, or to find a cure for this ailment, or to end human trafficking, right? So there's a real mission there, and that organization was formed to accomplish that specific mission. It doesn't just apply to nonprofits, but that's probably the easiest one just to really kind of wrap our heads around. So that's the definition of an organization. It's that simple. The organization is a tool to accomplish our purposes. It's what we use. We as humans use organizations. And again, with organizations, we remember that typically we accomplish our purposes better when we work alongside others. And I think in order to have an organization, you have to have at least a couple of people. I'm hard pressed to say that one person working by themselves is an organization. Again, that would be one of those, if we had live in-person class, we'd all grab a cup of coffee and kick that one around for a while. So I'll let you noodle on that, but I don't think it's possible. I think you have to have a group of people to be an organization. So again, it's our implement, it's our tool. Now, what we then study is, what this class is about, is studying organizational systems and behavior. And we're going to get into organizational systems. I'm going to touch on it here in this in this first module just a little bit, but we have a whole module on org behavior, and we have a whole module on organizational systems. Now, all of what we're talking about this course connects with those, but then we treat them a little bit separately. So what is organizational behavior? I mean, if you want to be really general, the behavior within organizations, right? But organizational behavior, or org behavior, is a distinct field of study, which means what? Well, it actually has theory behind it, and it's based on research. So you can actually major in organizational behavior at a college. You can get that. You can get your master's in org behavior. You can get a doctorate in organizational behavior, and so that's what I mean by it. It's a distinct field of study. It isn't just, oh, you're talking about the way people act in an organization. Well, no, it's the study of that and what goes into that, and motivations and rewards and management and leadership. All of that falls under organizational behavior. Now we have the textbook definition from Robbins and Judge, and you'll read this if you haven't already. But I'm sorry, this definition is not from Robbins and Judge. I apologize. This is from one of my professors. Should have looked at my own slide. This is from one of my professors that I had in a seminar in org behavior as part of my doctoral program, Fred Luthans. He retired from UNL a few years back. But in his book, Organizational Behavior, it's the understanding, prediction, and management of human behavior in organizations. So still a pretty simple definition, but that's what it is. So we're studying it. How do people operate in organizations? And then, I mean, the applied part of organizational behavior of the field would be, so then how do we make that better? How do we help improve organizations? And so that's org behavior. And then I'm going to give you, actually, I think I'm going to end this lecture here. I looked at the next slide. I don't want to get into that because that's going to take a little bit more time than I have. So I may end up splitting this module into 3 lectures just to keep them a little bit short. We'll see you in the next lecture.